In the chaos of life, this world can bring us trials and tribulations, going through seasonal changes where our lives never seem to stop. Where is the constant in our anxiety? Where is the antidote to our worry? How do we ground ourselves in this constant change? How forgetful am I of God's faithfulness? Oh, that peace that I receive, knowing in the midst of my brokenness, Jesus still saves. In the complexity of our culture, the Bible is still true. In the wonder of my calling, disciples still multiply. Even in my lack of confidence, the Holy Spirit will still move. Oh, that peace that I receive, knowing that the same God who was faithful then will be faithful again.
Because we have so many first-time guests this morning, I thought it'd be the perfect opportunity to introduce you all to our pastors here at King City Church. And so first up is our executive pastor, Caleb Miller. And as you can see, Caleb clearly has the most swag on our staff. That's that dad swag. He got the dad bod, Hawaiian shirt, and then the cutoff jeans just kind of seal the deal. And Caleb is also the most athletic on our staff. I know you can't tell, but in this picture, he's actually attempting to shoot a jump shot. And what he would say is, they say, well, it's just a bad picture. It's a poorly timed picture, but it's not. Because Wes was there in person, and look at Wes's face. Wes is so confused. Wes is like, is that supposed to be a jump shot, or what's he doing? What's he doing here? But thankfully, what Caleb lacks in athletic ability and in swag, he makes up for in cognitive ability. I found this out pretty quickly when we started working together. One day we were at Grace Christian, as Caleb said, the church that planted us. And we were talking about the power of multiplication. And Andrew Brown, the pastor there, he said, yeah, you're always going to grow quicker as a church through multiplication rather than addition. And Caleb said, yeah, that's why 2 times 2 is more than 2 plus 2. And unfortunately, he was being dead serious. And we're like, dude, you could have picked any other number. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Take your pick, just not 1 or 2. Another time, we were planning for our Christmas Eve service. And we wanted to do a candle-lit service. But we didn't want to use real candles. We knew there were going to be kids in there, so we're like, let's get some electronic fake candles that we can use. It'll create the same effect. And so we're on Amazon. We're both on our computers. And I found some, and I said, hey, I found these right here. I said, hey, I found some that are 1 foot long. Do you think that's about right? These are 1 foot. And Caleb, without hesitation, said, 1 foot, so 18 inches. And I said, what in the world are you talking about? He said, I'm showing you. They're going to be about this long, 18 inches, about like this. And in a smart aleck tone, I said, oh, 1 foot, 18 inches. Got it. And at this point, he was annoyed with me, and he said, yeah, as if to say, it's about time you caught on, you moron. And so that's Caleb. That's our executive pastor here at King City Church. And my name is Dakotah, and I'm the lead pastor here at King City. And the year that we were at Grace together, they started this new thing called 80-66. And so this is where they would read the Bible for 80 hours straight and go through all 66 books of the Bible. And they did every bit of this in front of a camera. It was streamed through Facebook Live. And they would have people sign up for 30-minute time slots. And the year that we were there, they said, hey, everybody on staff has to at least take a time slot. Now listen, I love reading the Word of God, but I really didn't want to take a time slot, and a couple reasons why. One, because I struggle reading out loud, especially when I don't know what I'm going to be reading and when it's those terrible Old Testament names. They're just ridiculous names. Two, I didn't want to do it because when I'm in a situation like that and it's really serious and I know I'm not supposed to laugh, it makes me want to laugh 10 times more. And then I knew that if for some reason I stumbled and I messed up, that the Grace staff, they were always giving me a hard time. So I knew they would never let it down if I were to stumble and mess up. But against my better judgment, I went ahead and did it, and this was the result.
Then the Levites arose, Mahath the son of Amasai, and Joel the son of Azariah, of the sons of Kohathites, and of the sons of Merari, Kish the son of Abdi, and Azariah the son of Jehalalel, and of the Gershonites, Joah the son of Zimmah, and Eden the son of Joah, and of the sons of Elizaphan, Shimri, and Joel, and of the sons of Asaph, Zechariah, and Mattaniah, and of the sons of Heman, Jehuel, and Shimi, and of the sons of Jeduthun, Shimei, and Uziel.
If you're wondering, like, why was that edited to zoom in a lot? That was the loving, caring pastor of Grace Christian, Andrew Brown, who did that. And they've shown that in their church probably 5 or 6 times. They absolutely gotten so many miles out of that. Let me first just say very quickly that, and you can ask anyone who goes here to King City, that I have the utmost respect and reverence for this right here, for the Word of God. Everything that we do here at King City has been founded on this one foundation of the Bible. But in that moment, I had one job, and I just could not have blown it any more than what I did. It all started when I sat down. I saw my fly was unzipped. Instead of leaving it alone, I zipped it up, and it was so much louder than what I thought it was going to be. So I knew that the camera had to have picked that up. And so then I started kind of giggling to myself already. And the woman who went before me, she did me dirty because she saw those names coming and she stopped a few minutes before her time was up. And I'm like, what's going on here? Well, as soon as I sat down, I was like, oh boy, I'm in for it. And here's the thing. I've been in ministry for 10 years, been a pastor now for 2, and I still cannot come close to reading any of those names. I mean, they're just ridiculous. Jeduthun, Jehalalel, Merari, and you're like, well, those were just the times. Those were the names back then. No, they weren't. There was also David and Daniel and Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. I didn't get a single one of those. So for better or worse, Caleb and I are the pastors and leaders here at King City Church. And most of you are like, it is a miracle that you all have made it this far. And that's exactly right. That is my exact point. When you hear those stories, those are factual stories. And when you hear those, it is abundantly clear that we are not here this morning because of Caleb or myself. In fact, God has blessed and grown King City so much over these past 2 years, not because of Caleb and I, but in many ways in spite of Caleb and I and all of our flaws and failures. This morning, as they said, we are celebrating 2 amazing years of ministry as a church here at King City Church. Yeah, give God praise for that. And I can promise you this, that we are not here this morning because I'm such a great preacher or because Caleb is such a great leader, but we are here this morning for one reason and one reason only, and that is because our God is still faithful. 2 Timothy 2 tells us this when it says, if we are unfaithful, He remains faithful, for He cannot deny who He is. This is why we are here today. Because even when we've made mistakes, even when we've failed, even in our unfaithfulness sometimes, our God has remained faithful because this is who He is. He is a faithful God. But sometimes, if you and I are not careful, we can easily forget this. We can easily forget to remember the faithfulness of God in our past because oftentimes we think that remembering the past and looking back on our lives can be harmful to us. Now, if you live in the past, if all you do is think about and dwell on the past, then that absolutely can be harmful to your life. But it can actually be very helpful not to live in the past, but to remember the past, to think about the past, to look back on your past sometimes, because if you do not remember the past, then you will not remember the faithfulness of God in your life. And you are so much more likely to doubt God in the present and question Him for the future if you do not remember how He has been faithful in the past. We see this time and time again in the Israelite people. They were always making the mistake of forgetting God's faithfulness to them in the past. For 400 years, the Israelites were slaves in Egypt. But then God raised up a man named Moses to be their deliverer. And in order to deliver them, God sent 10 supernatural plagues upon the Egyptians to force Pharaoh's hand to let them go. And then once they were let go and the Egyptians are pursuing the Israelites, God tells Moses to stick out your staff, and God miraculously parts the Red Sea so the Israelites can walk across to the other side and be rescued. But after God did all of that and was faithful to the Israelites in all of those ways, this is how the Israelites responded to the faithfulness of God. In Exodus 15, it says, Then Moses led the people of Israel away from the Red Sea. So they're coming out of the Red Sea, and they moved out into the desert of Shur. They traveled in this desert for 3 days without finding any water. When they came to the oasis of Marah, the water was too bitter to drink. So they called the place Marah, which means bitter. Then the people complained and turned against Moses. And God clearly tells Moses, He says, hey, they're not turning against you. They're not rebelling against you. They were rebelling against me. They complained and turned against Moses. What are we going to drink? They demanded. So Moses cried out to the Lord for help, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. Moses threw it into the water, and this made the water good to drink. I'm going to jump forward into Exodus 16. It says, Then the whole community of Israel set out for Elim and journeyed into the wilderness of Sin, between Elim and Mount Sinai. They arrived there on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. There too, so 1 month, this is 4 weeks after God had raised up Moses, sent the plagues, they had just come out of the Red Sea. 4 weeks after, this is how they're responding to God. There too, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. Listen to what they say. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around with pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted, but now you have brought us into this wilderness to starve us to death. So right after God had supernaturally rescued the Israelites from the Egyptians, God had been so unbelievably faithful to them. Their first response is to rebel against Him and turn their backs on Him. Even though He was faithful, they still said, hey, we are going to doubt you, we're going to complain, and they got frustrated with God even though He had been faithful to them. And as a parent, I feel God's pain in this because my sons do this to me all the time. A few months ago, my wife made some hamburgers for our family for dinner, but our youngest son, Knox, did not want to eat them. And so we were about to go to the mall, and I looked at Knox and I said, Bub, listen, you're not going to get anything to eat at the mall. It's not how this works. We're going to go to the mall, and you're going to eat this food when we come back. This hamburger is going to be waiting on you. And he said, okay, Daddy, I understand, Daddy. So we go to the mall. Of course, what does Knox do? We're passing by the food court, and Knox says, Daddy, can we please go over there and get some Chick-fil-A? I want some Chick-fil-A, Daddy. And I said, no, absolutely not. You're not getting Chick-fil-A. You're going to eat that hamburger as soon as we get back home. And Knox, with a bunch of people around, real loud, said, oh my goodness, can you please feed me today? I am starving to death. And I said, son, if you want to keep living in our house, you better lower your voice before someone calls CPS on your mother and I. And then we went over to Chick-fil-A because as a parent, you win some and lose some. You got to pick and choose your battles. But that was coming from a boy who never has and never will. He's never missed a meal. But instead of remembering my faithfulness to him, instead of remembering and being thankful for all the times I fed him and taken care of him, he turns his back on me every chance he gets. And when you read the rest of the book of Exodus and read the rest of the Bible, you will see this constant pattern in the lives of the Israelite people. Instead of remembering how God was faithful to them, instead of just looking back and remembering how God always provided for them, how He always took care of them, how He always delivered them, they would turn their backs on Him every chance they got. And so year after year, decade after decade, century after century, they stayed in this cycle because they refused to look back and remember the faithfulness of their God. All they had to do when they got into the desert and their bellies started rumbling and their mouths started feeling parched, instead of complaining, instead of getting mad at God, instead of turning their backs on Him, all they had to do was look back and say, wait a minute, the same God who is faithful to raise up Moses that stood up to the Pharaoh, the same God who was faithful to send those 10 plagues to force the hand of the Pharaoh, the same God who was faithful to part the Red Sea is the same God who will be faithful to us moving forward. The same God who was faithful then is the same God who will be faithful again. All they had to do was look back and remember the faithfulness of their God. But they refused. And because of that, they never entered into the promised land. That group of people, they wandered around the wilderness for 40 years because they refused to look back and remember God's faithfulness. They would doubt Him in the present, and they would question Him for the future because they refused to look back. Psalm 127:1 says, unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. As a church, we are not going to suffer the same fate as the Israelites, but we are going to enter into the promised land because we are going to consistently look back and remember our God's faithfulness. We're going to remember that this was a church that was not just started for God, but this was a church that was built by God, that it was not our might nor our power, but it was God and God alone who built this house. Unless the Lord builds the house, we just all labor in vain. So we are never going to forget that the only reason we are here this morning is because our God is still faithful. Give Him some praise this morning. Right after I was hired by Grace to plant this church, the first task and responsibility I had was to put together a launch team, a group of people that were going to help me plant and launch King City Church. And so I started meeting with people I knew and meeting with people there at Grace Christian And slowly but surely, God was faithful. God started growing that launch team, and we started with 10, then we went to 15, and then 25, and 30, and 40. And that was the group of people that we started this church with. And then the fall of 2022, 2 years ago, we had our first service, and we had it in the old Valvoline building, in the basement of that building. It's a 250,000 square foot building, and we were in the dungeon at the bottom of that place. We were in the basement, and we had no idea what we were doing. We didn't know if anyone was going to show up, but God was so unbelievably faithful, and we had over 200 people show up that day, and that was the start and the beginning of King City Church. And the 2 years that we were in that basement, God was so unbelievably faithful to us. Here's what God did through us during that time. So we saw 20 people give their lives to Jesus and take the step of baptism. We doubled our life groups and our servant leaders during that time. We tripled the size of our congregation from our launch team until now. We packed 10,000 meals to feed hungry families all over the world. We gave over $20,000 to local ministries and to meet local needs. And we raised $125,000 through our movement campaign so that we can make an even greater impact in this area for God's kingdom. And even though we were thankful for everything that God was doing in that basement, man, we were excited to get out of there. We were consistently looking for something new, something different. We said, man, if God can do this in a basement, imagine what He can do if we can find a building. And so we were looking for a space, and we got so desperate, it got to the point where I started calling around to every church in Lexington, and I was asking them if we could share space with them and have services inside of their building. And there was a church, I was talking to an interim pastor, and he said, hey, what do you think about the idea of you all merging with this church that I'm at right now? And I said, hey, we're open to a conversation. So he was like, hey, why don't you all come on over? So Caleb and I went over there, and it was amazing. And the building was awesome. And the more we talked to them, the more we just aligned with them in so many ways. And it really seemed like God was orchestrating the entire thing. We met with their board, and they kept saying, where do we sign? Where do we sign? Because they were acting like they wanted this to happen. We progressed so far into that we got to the point on a Thursday afternoon, I had a conversation with their board chair, and he said, hey, I want you to come preach next Sunday, and then after you preach, we'll take the congregational vote, and you'll definitely get that, and then we'll seal the deal, and this thing will be done, and we will move forward with this. I said, man, that sounds awesome. And we were so excited about it. So that was on a Thursday afternoon. That Saturday morning, I was on a walk with my sons, and I got an email, pulled it up on my phone, and it was from them. And with little to no explanation, they said they were no longer interested in partnering and merging with us whatsoever, and basically said, hey, just good luck. And when I tell you that was a gut punch, I genuinely felt physically ill in that moment, because we had been fasting and praying for a space. And we thought this was God answering our prayers. And the hardest part was I could not understand it. I'm like, Lord, why in the world did you even open the door in the first place? I mean, because I spent hours and hours and hours on that for months, working on that, trying to make that work. And God opened the door, and it's like He led us all the way to the 1 yard line just to slam the door back in our faces. But then I remembered Romans 8:28. It says, we know that God works all things together for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose for them. Now, notice it doesn't just say that God works the great things together for our good, but it says He works all things, which means the good and the bad. So God being faithful in your life doesn't mean that everything's always going to go your way. It doesn't mean everything's just going to be all sunshine and rainbows and hunky-dory in your life. But as followers of Jesus, we are going to face trials and pain and suffering just like everyone else. As followers of Jesus, He never told us that we wouldn't go through the storms of life. He just promised us we wouldn't go through those storms alone, because He is with us. This is who He is. He is a faithful God. He is faithful when life is good, but He remains faithful even when it's bad. He is for you on your best days, but He still has your back on your worst days. He will be with you when you are on the mountaintops of life and everything's going your way and you are winning, but He will come even closer to you when you are in the valleys of life. And it seems like everything around you is falling apart and everything is crumbling. And your mom, your dad, your brothers and sisters, your spouse could all desert you, but you will never be alone, because Jesus will never leave your side. So no matter what you may be going through, no matter how tough life it gets, no matter how many mistakes you have made, Jesus is always with you, Jesus is always for you, and Jesus is always working all things together for your good, because our God is still faithful. Hallelujah! Give Him praise this morning. So even though we did not understand it, none of us did. I told all of our leaders, we didn't understand why that happened, why that merger fell through. But we said, you know what? We're going to trust our God. Because He's been faithful before, He's going to be faithful again. We knew that He was somehow, some way, He was going to work it all together for our good. And that's exactly what He did. Because shortly after that door closed, this door began to open. And even though it was a long shot for us to get this space, God ended up opening this door and allowing us to call this the new home of King City Church. And so as a church, moving forward, even though we don't know, we don't have any guarantees of what's going to happen next. Even though we don't have any guarantees of what the future holds, we still look toward the future full of faith and full of confidence, knowing that the same God who was faithful then, when He put together the best launch team we could ever ask for, the same God who was faithful then when He blessed us and grew us in the basement of a corporate building, the same God who was faithful then when He closed one door so He could open up an even better one. All we know is that the same God who was faithful then is the same God who will be faithful again. The same God who was faithful in our past is the same God who will be faithful in our present and in our future. Give Him some praise.